If you've ever stared at a pile of fabric and wondered whether you're about to invest in another piece of equipment that will just sit in a corner, you're not alone. Most hobbyists and small businessuists feel that way. You want to avoid splurging on a machine that looks good on paper but ends up being a compromise in real life. The Janome Horizon MemoryCraft 9410QC is billed as a big bed, computer-controlled, all-purpose machine, but does it actually deliver the kind of reliability and flexibility you need for quilting, garment construction, and everyday stitching? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I did a bit of digging before hitting record. First, I scoped out the typical workflow of people who sit at a sewing table for hours, whether they're finishing a quilt block, sewing a dress for a client, or just mending a shirt. Then I skimmed through forum threads and the handful of written reviews that actually talk about how the Horizon behaves once it's in the shop, not just how the specs read on a sales page. What emerged were a handful of recurring themes: the need for a spacious work surface, the desire for a machine that can shift quickly between delicate fabrics and heavier layers, and the frustration when those smart controls feel more like a learning curve than an aid. The 9410QC's most obvious advantage is its large sewing area. The 15-inch throat space gives you enough room to handle a full-size quilt top or a multi-piece garment without constantly repositioning the fabric. In my own small studio, that translates to fewer interruptions, no more pausing to realign a 60-inch quilt piece every time you need a new seam line. For anyone who regularly works on quilts, blankets, or large upholstery projects, that extra real estate is genuinely a time saver. Conversely, if you're primarily a buttonhole and hem specialist who never goes beyond a simple t-shirt, the massive bed might feel like overkill and take up more table space than you need. Speed is another point that shows up in the user chatter. Janome claims up to 1060 stitches per minute, and in practice that's a noticeable boost when you're stitching straight seams on a fabric that doesn't demand extreme precision. When I cranked through a straight line project on a medium-weight cotton, the machine kept a consistent rhythm without the motor hiccuping. That said, the speed isn't a universal win. For intricate quilting patterns that require careful thread tension and stitch adjustment, many users advise dialing the speed back to a more manageable tempo. The Smart Console does offer an automatic speed adjustment feature when you select certain stitch types, but you still need to be comfortable overriding it if the pattern demands a slower feed. One of the features that actually impacts day-to-day stitching is the 7-piece feed dog system. The feed dogs can be raised, lowered, or even disengaged, which is critical when you're working with layered quilts, leather, or even stretchy knits. In real-world usage, that flexibility meant I could slide a 3-layer quilt sandwich without the fabric bunching up, then switch to a skinny knit panel and simply lower the feed dogs for a smoother pull. For someone who only sews woven cotton, you might not fully exploit that versatility, and the extra setting options may feel a bit daunting at first. Now, let's talk about the interface. The machine's control panel is a color LCD that walks you through stitch selection, thread tension, and even has an automatic needle up/down function. Most reviewers I found praised how the screen eliminates the guesswork of hunting through a manual for the right stitch. However, a few users mentioned a steep learning curve. They spent a couple of evenings just figuring out how to access the quick stitch menu. If you're comfortable with a touchscreen and enjoy tweaking settings, you'll probably appreciate that level of control. If you prefer a more tactile, button-only experience, the LCD might feel like an unnecessary layer. The built-in 300-stitch library, plus 4 alphabet options, is a decent mix for both functional and decorative stitching. In my experience, the decorative fonts are crisp enough for small monograms on tote bags, but if you're after high-fashion embroidery of fine script, you might still need a dedicated embroidery machine. The real practical strength here is the flexibility to switch from a straight stitch to a decorative border without swapping needles or adding a separate unit. For a hobbyist who loves to personalize items, that convenience can be a genuine cost saver. One area where the Horizon shows its limits is the accessory ecosystem. Some users reported that the included accessories like the quilting foot and needle set are solid, but you'll quickly find yourself reaching for third-party presser feet if you start tackling specialty fabrics like leather or heavy denim. The machine's interchangeable footplate does make swapping feet easy, yet the lack of a comprehensive accessory bundle out of the box means an extra expense down the line. If you're already sitting on a collection of presser feet, that's hardly a concern, but for a newcomer, factor that into your budget. Another practical concern is noise. The motor.